What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. So a quick announcement for all of you Spawncast listeners out there who have been asking me for what feels like a while now to put Spawncast on Spotify. It is now on Spotify. I did that over the weekend, so you can check that out in the link down below. There's a full account there you can follow and keep up to date on all the different episodes that go out, and who knows, maybe even a new podcast that's coming up here soon. Something to keep an eye out for. Today, though, we have several things to go over, which includes that deal between Microsoft, Bethesda, and ZeniMax appears to be coming to a close now. Maybe see an announcement here coming up pretty soon. Also, we're going to talk about Nintendo putting some pretty steep discounts on their first-party titles to celebrate Mario Day in a month where they're going to end up getting rid of a bunch of Mario games at the end of it. Also, we are going to talk about a bill that's passed in Germany now that's going to make it a lot harder for EA to put loot boxes in their games. Guys, if you enjoyed these videos, make sure that like button helps out a ton. And if you're new to the Small Wave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And we're going to start today with No More Heroes 1 and 2. Awesome announcements when they made that during the event, and then they just went up on the eShop immediately after the event ended. It's a good way to get people ready for No More Heroes 3 that we now know is coming out later on this year, but is all digital. There's no physical copy, and that was kind of disappointing. Something to really have for the collection. Looks like Limited Run Games is stepping in for this one, and there are quite a few choices, and we'll just take a look at some of the collector's editions here that we have as we go over some of the information. Pre-orders are going to go live March 12th, so in a day or two, and they're going to close April 11th. So we'll have about a month to get those pre-orders in, and we're going to have basic copies for $35 each, which I think are the ones that I'm going to go for, but if you are a massive No More Heroes fan, I'm sure you're already sizing up some of these collector's editions at $70 each, or you're just getting the large bundle that has both collector's editions at $135. It's cool because you put the two box arts together and it makes a single image. It kind of reminds me a bit of what we had with something like Dot Hack back during the PS2 day, where you put the spines, line them all up, and you have one kind of single image going across them. Really cool to see, though, that we're getting physical copies of No More Heroes. Something to pick up for the collection, even if it's just the $35 ones. Also, here's an interesting twist. Let's head over here to The Verge, where they say Microsoft starts testing Edge Chromium browser on Xbox. Xbox consoles are getting a much better browser soon. The part that I noticed, though, is further down in the article, they mentioned that Stadia would be functional through this browser on the Xbox. So that means that you could then just plug in an Xbox controller or just sync it up and then start playing Stadia right there on your Xbox system, which is odd because that is one of the big competitors that Microsoft's looking at right now. I know a lot of people go, okay, Xbox versus PlayStation, but it's very clear that Microsoft is pushing hard towards services, and that would then put them in line versus something like Stadia doing their own streaming service that's obviously struggling and not really, I don't think, has a great future right now based on their business strategy and some of the things they've done recently, like close down their studios. Nonetheless, though, it is weird to hear that that would be functional on an Xbox. I do wonder if Microsoft would look to throttle performance or cut it out completely, but that would also mean that xCloud, I guess, would work right away on the Xbox whenever it comes to PC through the browser. That could be something that Microsoft was sizing up, as well as they had mentioned they would want xCloud to work on consoles, which makes a lot of sense because that means that that old Xbox One system that you have would be able to play Series X games just through streaming, so something to keep an eye on here. Oh, and while we're on the topic of the Xbox, let's talk about the Xbox Store leaking another game, as it seems to do quite a bit. We can see some of the artwork here. This is Tomb Raider Definitive Survivor Trilogy. Is the complete edition of the award-winning Tomb Raider Origin games. With all the definitive edition content from each game, this trilogy promises dozens of hours of breathtaking exploration, challenging puzzle solving, and survival combat with Lara as she becomes the Tomb Raider she was destined to become. So the odd thing about this one is these games are already on the Xbox, and I guess they're just throwing into one package with all the additional content. It's a weird thing to do when you could just sell the person that on sale and it's just 3 different games that you get in your basket when you're checking out. My hope here, because it does mention 4K and HDR10 and all that, is that there are next-gen enhancements for these games. I mean, they already look really, really good, but I'm sure they'd go a step further with it, and that's the one thing that would make this at least make sense to me. Otherwise, they are just literally just pairing a bunch of stuff together and then reselling it. So we'll see. The fact that this is on the Xbox Store now and it's already leaked out tells me the announcement's coming up pretty soon. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with the Microsoft Bethesda ZeniMax buyout. When this was announced last year, it absolutely shook the gaming world. People could not believe that Microsoft really rolled up with $7.5 billion and bought Bethesda and ZeniMax. A ton of IPs were about to shift right over to Microsoft under their umbrella, but the deal was still pending technically. There's a lot of paperwork, a lot of signing, all kinds of stuff that had to take place, and Microsoft had mentioned, okay, we're gonna try to have this done basically before the end of like their fiscal year. Basically by the end of June, they want to have this deal done, and it looks like it's getting done sooner than even I was thinking. I was kind of figuring it would actually take until like May or June. But let's take a look at a couple of events and headlines that have happened here throughout the weekend. We can see here, this from Tweaktown, Microsoft's ZeniMax buyout complete, listed as realized by investor, the huge $7.5 billion. Microsoft ZeniMax merger has gone through as Providence Equity lists its ZeniMax investment as realized. Then if we go over here to GameSpot, Microsoft's Bethesda purchase approved by SEC. The notice brings Bethesda and parent company ZeniMax one step closer to being part of Xbox. Now, what's interesting about this is it lines up with some of the rumors and different things we've heard that Microsoft is going to have something to announce, or some sort of like smaller event even sometime in March, with a lot of people mentioning like the middle of March, third week of March, somewhere in there. And the fact that this deal is getting done leads me to believe that maybe they'll actually start talking about their plans for Bethesda, because if you really look at the interviews that Phil Spencer's been in, for example, he's been very coy about what their plans are. He sidesteps a lot of the questions because everyone wants to know what's going to happen with Starfield, what's going to happen with Elder Scrolls 6, what about those exclusives that are currently for Sony's platform like Deathloop that Arcane is doing? Are those going to just stay a PS5 exclusive, or are they eventually going to go to the Xbox? Because that's all your branding now. Like, those are your IPs. What are your plans with things like Elder Scrolls 6? Yeah, those are pretty hard questions to answer when you're still trying to get approval from the SEC and get through all of this paperwork. It's very obvious they were trying to be quiet because of that. But as soon as the deal is done, I'm pretty sure you're going to see them start talking quite a bit about what their plans are. And I'm kind of thinking one of the first things they would start talking about is Starfield, because we've seen more and more rumors about Starfield coming up sooner than I think people were expecting, and a lot of it has to do with the limited amount of information we have right now. Even if there is a very basic screenshot that gets out there that looks like it might be Starfield, the internet explodes. And the last screenshot that happened was apparently like a fake, and somebody like played around with the overall color saturation and kind of made it look like it with some of the hub elements, and then it wasn't Starfield. So yes, a lot of hype around that game, and the fact that Microsoft would control it and could potentially make it an Xbox Game Pass PC exclusive and just completely remove it from what people were believing to be a PlayStation game when Bethesda had first announced it would be it'd be interesting to see how the internet reacts to that. Now, one thing I will say is the event that is being rumored, I've been hearing from people to not get your expectations through the roof. There's a chance that they do just announce that the Bethesda deal is done, and maybe they announce some things going to Game Pass, because there's still quite a bit of games I'm sure they could move over from the Bethesda ZeniMax library as they finish up that acquisition. But I think this week is the week they're going to start talking about it, as it looks like a lot of the formalities are done. So give me your best guess down below. Is Starfield going to be on the PlayStation as well as the Xbox, or is that now just going to be a Microsoft exclusive? Next up, let's talk about some actual sales that Nintendo is doing on some first-party titles. It's not normal, and yes, this is actual news because of how rare it is and how steep some of these discounts are. Now, this is in celebration of Mario Day, which is March 10th. That's Mar and then 10. It looks like Mario. You get the idea here. The funny part is that it's in the month that they are going to get rid of Mario games at the end. So I guess that's the big finale. They just wipe out Mario. But let's take a look here. This is from Nintendo's deals site that is linked down below if you want to head on over there and check some of these out. This is Happy Mario Day. Celebrate everyone's favorite ground-pounding superstar by saving 35% on select Mario games. These deals last through 11:59 p.m. Pacific time on March 13th. And I mean, right away, like Super Mario Maker 2 is $39. Super Mario Party is $39. Me sounding like that is because they still haven't updated it with anything. I assume that means Super Mario Party 2 is coming this year or something, just to annoy me. Anyway, Luigi's Mansion 3 is $39, which that is a really good deal. Actually, out of the three of these, you know what? I recommend fully Luigi's Mansion 3. I think that is probably the best one to pick up right here. And then Mario Tennis Aces they have at $39. Now, maybe you're saying, well, yeah, but those are all digital. I don't want to just grab digital games only. I want to build some of my collection up here with some physical copies. Good news, it appears that retailers are following the same trend here for the sales. We can take a look, for example, at Best Buy or GameStop or any of those, where they have these listed as $21 off at Best Buy, the same 4 titles here, and then it looks like Yoshi's Crafted World was also marked down, with Wario 64 pointing this one out over at Walmart. And I'll tell you now, based on the way Nintendo runs things where they don't drop prices of their games like at all, I mean, ARMS is still $60, 1-2 Switch is still $50, just as examples. This is probably the best you're gonna get in terms of sales for these games at all from first-party Nintendo, especially from Nintendo themselves digitally. I mean, we'll see like GameStop and Walmart and Best Buy occasionally do like $20 off or something, but this, like 35% off is pretty solid. Looking through them, yeah, maybe you didn't want to pay $6 for something like Mario Party, but you like Mario Party and you're like, I don't know. Hey, this isn't bad for less than $40. Luigi's Mansion 3 is still my pick out of these ones though. I think at less than $40, it is an absolute pickup. Definitely worth it. Next up, let's talk about EA and loot boxes. Now, we have seen EA go to great lengths to defend FIFA Ultimate Team and loot boxes all over the world. They are fighting, it seems anyway, litigation and bills and all kinds of stuff everywhere, trying to keep everything legal when it comes to loot boxes and selling their games with the little E for everyone, or the Peggy 3 and all this, basically being able to sell it to anyone that wants to pick this up, even if they're like younger kids, and we've gone through the whole thing with loot boxes versus gambling and all of this. Well, it does look like in Germany, it's gonna be a little harder for them to sell these games with loot boxes, which seems to mostly revolve around FIFA Ultimate Team. We can head over here to Reddit where it was translated, and some of the key points were picked out, saying shops will check your ID, or the postal service will check your ID if you buy online, that being for any game rated at 18, and games with loot box mechanics. So as they point out here, FIFA 21 Ultimate Team, rated 12, would either be rated 18 or must deactivate their loot box mechanic. A game with a loot box mechanic could not be rated lower than 18. Loot box mechanic is paid content with gambling-like mechanisms. Okay, so we kind of figured this would happen eventually with all, I mean, there's so many stories out there about what happens with some of these loot boxes, and tons of money getting charged to credit cards for parents and complaints coming in for that, and the overall gambling tendencies that are passed on and what all of these different companies tend to use. We talked about an actual slot machine being in NBA 2K at one point, and then putting it in a trailer because they're like, we can do, I mean, obviously we can do this, no one's stopping us. So eventually you'll push it too far and you'll get something like this. My question here is, what's stopping them from selling the game at like an E for everyone or Peggy 3 or wherever, and then they have FIFA Ultimate Team as optional DLC that is rated 18 then? Like, and it's just on the shop for free if you have the game. I mean, at that point, and it gets inserted into the game, would that then stop it from being rated like 3 or E or whatever over the counter at some of these different stores? Also, I'm curious what the penalty is exactly here, because there might be a point where EA says, all right, well, how much money are we making from these loot boxes if we leave them in for Ultimate Team? Versus how much would be fine? Can we make that work? I don't know if eventually it becomes criminal and they like storm like the EA building and start arresting people. I don't know if it goes that far, but like, I just think of all the ways that EA will try to get around this, and the idea that we have these systems connect to the internet at all times, where updates can be pushed and removed, and we've seen it before when it comes to live service style games. So at this point, I see that they are working to pass this kind of stuff, but at the same time, I'm thinking, okay, EA probably has a contingency plan or something figured out where they can get around this by altering the game after you've bought it over the counter. But interesting stuff here, and we'll see what EA does going forward here if more and more of these bills start popping up. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about an interview that took place between Shintaro Furukawa at Nintendo, the president there, and Nikkei, I always say it wrong, but we're gonna go with Nikkei for this one, and them talking about the overall lifespan of the Switch currently, its success, and some of their plans going forward here. And I have to say, I do like some of the things that Furukawa said in this interview, because it still continues to show urgency despite the Switch being very, very successful. It's something that I noticed with Nintendo when it came to the Wii. That was exceptional for them when it came to sales. But it was pointed out even in this interview that like the sales after a little while there just fell off a cliff. They just stopped selling Wii systems. It's almost like Nintendo got comfortable with what was happening and didn't feel the need to push further. That seems to be a bit different here with what Furukawa is saying, and maybe they're looking back at the Wii, which we assume the Switch is going to pass possibly this year in terms of sales and become their best-selling home console, and just kind of reflecting on it and taking notes as to what happened. This is some of the stuff he said. Currently, the Switch's sales are exceedingly favorable and achievements are also good, but I have zero peace of mind. Not matter the hits in the entertainment business, people someday do lose interest. Up until now, we have repeatedly had the experience of our business taking a nosedive. Because of this, I myself, as well as those within the company, do not all think the current state of affairs will keep going and going. For Furukawa, he believes that every single year is a do or die situation. You must give new customers fresh surprises, and our existence can slip into obscurity at any time. I always have this kind of sense of crisis. See, that's something I like to hear from someone steering the ship at Nintendo, someone who's not getting comfortable, who's not like, oh, we just sold 80 million, we're on track for 100 million, we're gonna pass the Wii, no problem, we can kind of take it easy now. Now is actually when you need to push, because I've said this before and I'll say it again, if the Wii had a revision that made it a Wii HD and actually put an HDMI port on it and kind of accepted the HD era a bit sooner than with the Wii U, I think the life of that Wii could have been extended a little further, especially if they did a bit of an upgrade to some of the parts in the Wii. I mean, at that point, the Wiis that were coming out didn't even play GameCube games anymore, so they weren't even trying to keep compatibility there. If they had just made a bit of a half step, they wouldn't have had to have come out with the Wii U as soon as it did, and then we saw what happened with the Wii U. It wasn't pretty. So I like the idea of them looking at this and saying, how can we keep pushing things? And yes, I do think there is a Switch revision coming up here soonish within this fiscal year that they're about to enter by the end of April or by the end of March 2022. And I'm sure that they are pushing hard for all kinds of software. I'm just happy to hear that the president of Nintendo isn't getting comfortable with how well the Switch is doing, because that's not what Nintendo should be thinking right now. They should be thinking, how can we sell another 80 million Switch units? And before we go to the comment of the day, let's take a look at the poll that I posted up over the weekend here. It says, would you pay $70 for games of microtransactions went away? And hey, 74% of you said yes, 26% of you said no, and actually quite a few people in the comments said, well, it should just be $6 and no microtransactions. And unfortunately, the companies don't seem that interested in that one at all. Even we see some of the first-party developers do more DLC and passes, essentially expansion passes that try to collect the money up front and then give you the content later. It's a whole thing now, but the microtransactions have, of course, compounded on top of that, and it's like the biggest annoyance to a lot of people currently with full price titles. Free-to-play games, people accept it. They said, boy, they gotta make money somehow. But if you spend 60 and then you got microtransactions, now we're talking 70 with like something like NBA 2K and there's still microtransactions, it is frustrating. I myself would pay 70 if I could guarantee that there was nothing else I had to buy and the game itself was high quality. And yes, DLC could still come down the road, I understand, but as long as it's not day one DLC that's obvious that it probably could have gone into the game, my problem is that's not gonna happen. We're gonna pay $70 for these games, and there's still gonna be 3 different kinds of currencies, 2 of which you can pay for, or extra things for costumes and all of this. The $10 raising of price, I don't think is gonna affect anything with these microtransactions. In fact, I actually think they might get worse. And we'll finish up with a comment of the day as you're seeing here. This is from Mature Gaming saying, here's pretty much the only thing I want to see out of a Switch Pro. More 60 FPS optimized games. I'm too blind to see the difference between 720 and 1080, but I'm not too blind to see 30 and 60 FPS games. And it's certainly something you would notice. Like if you're playing Splatoon 2 now, 60 frames per second, which is great. But I'll tell you now, if they cut that down to 30, you would immediately notice it. More so for these fast-paced games like that, or a Mario Odyssey, for example. I do like the idea of something like Zelda Breath of the Wild. If the Switch Pro is strong enough, if they did have a patch for 60 frames per second for that one while still being upscaled to 4K, that would be pretty cool to see if that's possible with some of the upscaling techniques that are out there. But I will say this, for gaming in general right now, I like the emphasis that's being placed on frame rate. I was concerned that we would stop talking about 4K and then just start talking about 8K. But instead, the conversation shifted to 120 frames per second. And that is the direction I would like to see us going, because I think most people are going to be fine with 4K. It's just now can we start talking about the frame rates? And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. It really helps out. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. There's Mario Day. Are you picking up any of those games that are on sale right now? I mean, it's pretty good for Nintendo considering they don't really drop their prices at all. Also, what do you think about the Microsoft Bethesda ZeniMax buyout, the deal here that's happening? Do you think we're getting an announcement this week and Microsoft will finally start talking about what's happening with Starfield, and how does EA get around the situation with the loot boxes and the bills that are being passed? Because let's face it, they're gonna figure out something. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.